Behind me is Castle St. Angelo. Before you even step inside Castle Sant'Angelo, your gaze is drawn to the graceful sweep of Ponte Sant'Angelo, the ancient Roman bridge that spans the Tiber. Built by Emperor Hadrian to link the city with his monumental tomb, this crossing has become an icon of Rome's Baroque imagination. Lining the travertine balustrades are 10 angels, each sculptured in the 17th century under the direction of Gian Lorenzo Bernini and his workshop. These figures, wielding instruments of Christ's Passion, transform the bridge into an open-air gallery of spirituality and artistic mastery, inviting pilgrims and travelers alike towards the massive cylindrical fortress beyond. For those planning a visit, Castel Sant'Angelo is typically open Tuesday through Sunday from 9 a.m. to 7:30 p.m, with the last entry around 6:30 p.m. and closed on Mondays. Standard adult admission is around €16, with reduced rates for youth and free entry on the first Sunday of each month. Long before Castel Sant'Angelo dominated Rome's skyline, the land beneath it lay at the edge of the ancient city's sacred limits. This stretch of the right bank of the Tiber belonged to what Romans considered a peripheral zone, beyond the Pomerium, the religious boundary where burials were permitted but daily civic life was not meant to intrude. The area was semi-rural, marked by gardens, villas and funerary monuments that lined the approaches to Rome. Choosing this site for an imperial tomb was therefore deliberate. It placed the monument in dialogue with Roman traditions of commemorating the dead along major roads and river crossings, while still keeping it visually connected to the heart of the capital. The ground itself, close to the river, required careful preparation. Roman engineers stabilized the soil with deep concrete foundations and a massive square platform designed to distribute enormous weight. These substructures, largely hidden from view, formed the essential base that allowed the future mausoleum to rise securely on challenging terrain. Construction of Hadrian's mausoleum began around 123 AD, during the later years of Emperor Hadrian's reign. By this time, the emperor was deeply concerned with legacy and memory, and he envisioned a dynastic tomb that would rival and perhaps surpass the mausoleum of Augustus. The project required immense resources, concrete poured in thick layers, blocks of tufa and peperino for the core, and fine travertine and marble for the outer facing. Hadrian did not live to see its completion. When he died in 138 AD at Baiae, his successor Antoninus Pius oversaw the mausoleum's final works, and in 139 AD Hadrian's ashes were placed here with great ceremony. The tomb then became the resting place for several emperors and their families, including Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, making it a true imperial dynastic monument. Inside, the structure was carefully engineered for both symbolism and stability. A gently ascending spiral ramp wide enough for processions led from the entrance upward toward the central burial chamber. This controlled upward movement created a ritual journey from the earthly realm toward the elevated heart of the monument. Deep interior chambers housed the funerary urns. In later centuries, some of these spaces would be reused as storerooms and eventually prisons. Originally, however, this was not a fortress but a statement in stone, a carefully constructed machine of memory designed to secure an emperor's name in eternity. By late antiquity, roughly the 3rd to the 8th century AD, the transitional era in which the classical Roman world gradually transformed into the medieval one, Hadrian's tomb had already begun its shift from funerary monument to military asset. Its massive concrete core and elevated position near the Tiber made it well suited for defense. During the 5th and 6th centuries, as Rome endured repeated invasions, the structure was incorporated into the Aurelian defense system, turning the mausoleum mausoleum into a fortified strongpoint controlling the river crossing. The decisive conversion into a true fortress occurred in the Middle Ages. In 1389, Pope Boniface IX ordered substantial defensive works. He isolated the cylindrical tomb from its ancient base, created new internal passages, and added walls, battlements, and a moat. A raised entrance accessible only by drawbridge replaced the original Roman doorway. The objective was explicit: to establish a papal refuge capable of resisting siege in a politically unstable Rome. In the following centuries, successive popes reinforced the complex. Angular bastions were constructed in response to gunpowder artillery, and the fortress became integral to Vatican security. The elevated Passetto di Borgo, the fortified corridor linking the castle to St. Peter's Basilica, provided a secure escape route, most famously used during the sack of Rome in 1527. Simultaneously, the upper levels assumed a residential function. In the 16th century, Pope Paul III commissioned refined apartments adorned with Renaissance frescoes, transforming the once sepulchral monument into a residence of status. Layer by layer, the structure evolved from tomb to fortress to palace, each phase mirroring the shifting political and military realities of Rome. The woman you see in the portrait, Beatrice Cenci, occupies a unique place in the history of Castel Sant'Angelo, where documented fact and later legend intertwine. Her story begins not in myth, but in the rigid social world of late 16th century Rome. Born in 1577 into a noble Roman family, Beatrice was the daughter of Francesco Cenci, an aristocrat known even in his own time for violence, access, and repeated conflicts with the law. Despite his crimes, his wealth and status allowed him to avoid severe punishment, a reminder of how uneven justice could be in papal Rome. Historical records describe Francesco Cenci as abusive toward his household. Testimonies from the period recount severe mistreatment of his children and second wife. Within this atmosphere of fear, a conspiracy emerged. In 1598, Francesco was murdered at his family castle in Petrella del Salto. Beatrice, her stepmother Lucrezia, and her brother Giacomo were implicated in the plot. The papal authorities treated the case not as a domestic tragedy, but as a capital crime. Arrested and brought to Rome, the family was imprisoned and interrogated. Castel Sant'Angelo, already functioning as a papal prison, became part of this judicial process. Confessions were reportedly extracted under torture, a legal practice accepted at the time but deeply troubling by modern standards. In 1599, Beatrice Cenci, still only in her early 20s, was executed on the Ponte Sant'Angelo before a large public crowd. Contemporary reactions were complex. Many Romans sympathized with her, believing she had acted against unbearable cruelty. Others saw the sentence as necessary to preserve social order and paternal authority. This tension between justice and compassion would later fuel her legend. In the centuries that followed, Beatrice Cenci's historical identity slowly transformed into a cultural symbol. Artists, writers, and poets reimagined her not merely as a convicted parricide, but as a tragic heroine, a victim of tyranny and a martyr to innocence. The Rome of the Baroque and Romantic periods proved especially receptive to such narratives. Painters began to construct an image of Beatrice that aligned with ideals of purity and suffering. Since no authenticated portrait from her lifetime exists, these representations are imaginative. She is often shown as a young woman with luminous skin, gentle features, and a contemplative gaze. A simple head covering appears frequently, suggesting modesty and virtue. The visual language borrows from Baroque aesthetics: soft light, emotional restraint, and a sense of spiritual depth. In these works, Beatrice becomes less a historical figure and more an embodiment of injustice endured with dignity. Her story attracted later writers as well. Percy Bysshe Shelley, Stendhal, and other 19th century authors retold her fate, each shaping her into a symbol of resistance against oppression. Through art and literature, she entered the realm of collective memory, where the boundary between history and legend often blurs. Yet, Beatrice Cenci's story is only one layer of Castel Sant'Angelo's long association with power, privilege, and confinement. Above the prison chambers rose the papal apartments, spaces designed not for suffering but for display, diplomacy, and residence. The same structure that held prisoners also sheltered popes, cardinals, and visiting dignitaries. From the 15th century onward, Castel Sant'Angelo functioned as a fortified papal refuge. Popes such as Nicholas V, Alexander VI, Julius II, and Paul III invested in its transformation. Their presence reflects the political realities of Renaissance Italy, where the papacy operated not only as a spiritual authority but as a territorial power navigating alliances, wars, and rivalries. The upper apartments reveal this dual identity. Lavishly decorated rooms communicated legitimacy and refinement. Fresco cycles, heraldic symbols, and mythological themes projected continuity with imperial Rome while reinforcing papal prestige. Artists such as Perrine Del Vega and his workshop contributed to these decorative programs, drawing inspiration from ancient Roman painting, especially the rediscovered Domus Aurea of Nero. Grotesque motifs, classical scenes, and illusionistic architecture filled the ceilings and vaults. Furniture within these spaces was functional yet symbolic. Large fireplaces, carved wooden cabinets, ceremonial chairs, and textile hangings signaled rank and hospitality. Even the arrangements of rooms reflected hierarchy. Private papal chambers separated from reception halls, archives, and administrative spaces. Within these walls, diplomacy unfolded alongside intrigue. Renaissance courts were environments of negotiation, rivalry, and occasionally scandal. Castel Sant'Angelo witnessed moments of fear during sieges, including the sack of Rome in 1527, when Pope Clement VII famously took refuge here via the Passetto di Borgo. The fortress palace became a literal shelter for papal survival. Scandals too formed part of its history. Certain prisoners were high-ranking clergy or political figures accused of corruption, conspiracy, or heresy. Their confinement illustrates how the castle served both as symbol and instrument of papal justice. The same institution that commissioned great works of art also enforced doctrinal and political control. Thus, Castel Sant'Angelo encapsulates contrasts, mercy and punishment, beauty and fear, legend and documentation. Beatrice Cenci's story resonates precisely because it sits at this intersection. Her imprisonment links the fortress to human drama, while her later mythologization reveals how societies interpret the past to express their own values. Today, visitors walking through the papal apartments and prison cells encounter layers of history rather than a single narrative. Frescoed ceilings coexist with stone corridors once used for detention. Portraits and decorative art stand near spaces associated with interrogation and judgment. This coexistence is not accidental. It reflects the multifunctional nature of the structure across centuries. In the end, Castel Sant'Angelo is not merely a monument, but a record of transformation. It began as an imperial tomb, evolved into a fortress, served as a prison, and became a papal residence. Within its walls lived rulers and captives, artists and guards, reformers and conspirators. The story of Beatrice Cenci is one thread in this vast tapestry, powerful because it humanizes a place otherwise defined by architecture and authority. Among the many scandals tied to Castel Sant'Angelo, few illustrate the political nature of the Renaissance papacy better than the controversy surrounding Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia. His pontificate from 1492 to 1503 coincided with a period when the papacy functioned as both a spiritual authority and a territorial monarchy. Alexander VI was deeply involved in dynastic politics, openly promoting the advancement of his children, most famously Cesare Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. Contemporary observers, including ambassadors and chroniclers, accused his court of nepotism, moral laxity, and calculated political manipulation. Castel Sant'Angelo played a practical role in this environment. It served as a secure treasury and a place of detention for rivals. Political prisoners, including disfavored nobles and clergies, could be confined here on papal order. The fortress symbolized the Pope's temporal power, not only in his ability to govern souls, but to control territory, wealth, and bodies. The Borgia period revealed how closely papal authority was entangled with Italian power struggles among city-states, French and Spanish monarchies, and ambitious noble families. These tensions contributed to the gradual weakening of the papal states. The papacy in the late 15th and early 16th centuries faced constant military pressures and shifting alliances. Control over central Italy depended on diplomacy as much as faith. As European monarchies grew stronger and more centralized, the Pope's territorial rule became increasingly fragile. Financial strain, war expenses, and internal corruption further complicated governance. The image of the papacy as a universal mediator was challenged by its visible participation in Italian warfare. This fragility became unmistakable during the sack of Rome in 1527, one of the most traumatic events in the city's history. The attacking army, composed largely of unpaid imperial troops loyal to Emperor Charles V, included Spanish soldiers and German landsknechts, many of them Lutheran. Their advance on Rome was driven as much by lack of pay as by politics. When discipline collapsed, the campaign turned into a prolonged episode of looting and violence. The sack lasted for months, not merely days. Churches, palaces, and monasteries were plundered. Clergy and civilians alike suffered ransom, assault, and displacement. Rome's population declined sharply as residents fled or fell victim to disease and famine that followed the occupation. The catastrophe sent shockwaves across Europe. For many contemporaries, it symbolized divine judgment or the end of Rome's unquestioned prestige. For the papacy, the consequences were profound. The event weakened papal political autonomy and forced a reassessment of its diplomatic strategies. In the longer term, it accelerated the shift away from Renaissance papal militarism towards more cautious statecraft. Some historians even view the sack as marking the symbolic end of the High Renaissance in Rome, as artistic patronage and urban confidence temporarily collapsed. Within Castel Sant'Angelo, these broader struggles were reflected in stone. The fortress remained a secure node in a city otherwise vulnerable to upheaval. It embodied the paradox of papal rule, a religious office sustained by military architecture and political calculation. Although often remembered as a monument or prison, Castel Sant'Angelo also functioned as an active military structure that saw real combat. One of the earliest recorded battles connected to the site occurred during the Gothic War in the 6th century, when Byzantine general Belisarius defended Rome against the Ostrogoths. Contemporary accounts describe defenders using the monument's height as a tactical advantage. In a striking example of improvised warfare, heavy marble statues were reportedly hurled down upon attacking forces when conventional ammunition ran low. Over time, the castle's battlements evolved to match developments in warfare. Medieval crenellations gave way to lower, thicker parapets, suited to gunpowder combat. Open artillery terraces allowed cannon to be positioned with wide fields of fire toward the river and surrounding approaches. Defensive features such as arrow slits were gradually modified into gun ports, reflecting the transition from archery to firearms. The fortress thus became a textbook example of how military architecture adapted to technological change. The size of the papal garrison varied by period, but during moments of heightened tension in the 16th and 17th centuries, several hundred soldiers could be stationed here. These included infantry, artillery specialists, guards, and support personnel. The castle functioned not only as a battlefield position, but also as a logistical center, storing weapons, powder, and provisions necessary for prolonged defense. As for siege equipment, the garrison relied primarily on artillery once gunpowder warfare became dominant. Cannons of different calibers, including culverins and smaller field pieces, were mounted on the upper levels. Handheld firearms such as arquebuses and later muskets equipped the troops. Defensive doctrine emphasized deterrence. A well-armed fortress could discourage attacks simply by demonstrating readiness. Even in the 19th century, the site retained military relevance. During the conflicts surrounding Italian reunification, it served as a strategic strongpoint and barracks, showing that the defensive value endured far beyond the Renaissance. Castel Sant'Angelo's military history reveals a structure continually reinterpreted for survival. Its walls were not merely symbolic, they were re-engineered for conflict, adaptation, and the realities of war across more than a millennium. Castel Sant'Angelo began as a mausoleum, transformed into a fortress, later evolved into a papal palace reserved for figures of prestige and power, and today stands as a museum open to all, a monument whose changing functions reflect the shifting history of Rome itself. Anyway folks, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.